everybody. Let's talk about battles of the American Revolution today. Um, we've already talked about some, and the last thing we talked about was the Declaration of Independence. The battles we've talked about before actually occurred before the Declaration of Independence. So think about this progression of the war. I'm going to give you some help on Atlas Activity 17 and some help on um, the guided notes for events and battles of the American Revolution as we go today. So let's start with Atlas Activity 17. There's a section on there that asks you about how the war progressed from or through the different years of the war. So if you think about the beginning of the war, Britain thought they were going to come into New England, those northern colonies, just flex their muscles as the most powerful empire on earth and crush the rebellion in New England. They didn't think anybody else in the colonies were in on the rebellion. So they thought if they could squash it in New England, it would go away. Well, really quickly, Lexington and Concord, Ticonderoga, and Bunker Hill proved that strategy was not going to work. All three of those battles take place before we've even declared independence from Great Britain. So we've got the Declaration of Independence that's signed on July 4th, 1776. That's when the formal war begins. It formally starts when we declare war in the Declaration. And I want to point that out here. I know this is highlighted, but something else to look at. This is going to help you with the guided notes paper. Revolutionary War is in all caps. When you see words in all caps, those are answers that go in the blanks for the guided notes. Not every answer is in all caps, but when you see words in all caps, those words should end up in your guided notes. So we fight those first few battles without having declared war. Then we declare war in the Declaration of Independence, and the British strategy shifts. It shifts to the middle colonies, and it's just going to work its way down. In the middle of the war, the middle battles, the middle events, those are taking place mostly in those middle colonies: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. And the first major battle of the war is the Battle of Long Island, the battle for New York. First major battle, largest battle of the war. The British brought 32,000 troops and a whole bunch of ships to fight this battle. If you're a Hamilton fan, you'll recognize that. 32,000 troops in New York Harbor. Yes, and a fleet of ships. Largest battle of the war, more troops than anybody or in any battle of the war. And the British win. They crushed them, the Patriots. It was ugly. The Patriots were, again, Hamilton reference, outgunned, outmanned, outnumbered, and outplanned, for sure. And they brought Hessian soldiers. Washington thought he had an advantage, and he did not. One thing that was helping him, he had spies. And so I know this is on your notes. Nathan Hale was a school teacher spying for the Patriots against the British. They caught him. They hanged him. And his last words, this famous quote, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." Meaning if he could do it over and over and over again, he would. But Washington, I don't know, it seems like a really bad strategy to me. His plan was to fight off the British here on Long Island. And this is a zoom out. This is Long Island. It's always bad when you find yourself defending an island because if things go wrong, you can't get away. His troops were here in Brooklyn Heights, right across from Manhattan Island. This is New York City. All the big skyscrapers, the Twin Towers were here on Manhattan Island. This is downtown New York City right here. But New York is huge. It's a big section here, several burgs. Brooklyn is one of those. This was where Washington made his stand. This is that area blown up. And he controlled the high ground, and he thought he'd do just like we did at Bunker Hill, hold the high ground forever against the British. Well, he didn't have it defended very well, and the British came around the side. You can see that happening here. And so Washington's forced to retreat. As he retreats, of course, he's going to run out of room, and he runs out of room in Brooklyn Heights. And the British close in, but it took the entire day. So it's almost dark. In the 1700s, people did not fight in the dark. So the British general, General Howe, he thinks he's got all the time in the world. He'll let Washington sleep that night, and then in the morning, Washington will surrender. The war will be over. Well, Washington is a little sneakier than that, and he's not quite ready to give up. So he tells his men, build up big fires, cook food, sing songs, make it look like you're here. But all night long, Washington was sending men across the East River on rowboats, and they made it to Manhattan Island. That doesn't mean they were safe, but it means they were safe for the time being. The British quickly also crossed the East River and chased him up Manhattan Island. When we go back over to this map, you can see what's going on here. Every time Washington stops here and tries to put up a fight, he gets annihilated by the British. So from August all the way through December, he is running away from the British. His army cannot make a stand. They run up through New York along the Hudson. They cross the Hudson River, come back down on this side, make their way through New Jersey. And by December, they end up just across the Delaware River in rural Pennsylvania, right across from the city of Trenton, New Jersey. So here's the thing. Also in the 1700s, they didn't fight in the wintertime. It's miserable to move a camp and tents and all that kind of stuff. So there were really two seasons. There was the fighting season from late spring all the way into late fall, and then there was the party season. And so wintertime, especially in New York, was party season. The British troops made their way back to New York City, where they had parties all winter long. But they wanted to make sure Washington didn't do anything crazy, like sneak his army back up here and try to attack them in the wintertime, or try to run away. So the British left 2,000 Hessian troops in the city of Trenton, New Jersey in late December. Washington was in deep trouble at this point. The men's enlistment was about to be up. You can see when the fight was. Christmas. Nobody fights on Christmas except George Washington. The men's enlistment was up on January 1st. So they were counting down the days. They were tired of losing. You all, I know a lot of you have played sports, and I know a lot of you have played for teams that were really terrible. And when teams are really terrible, it's miserable just showing up. You don't want to go to practice. You don't want to go to games. You don't want to see your teammates. You just want the season to be over. That's where these guys were. They were at the point where they just wanted January 1st to get there. They were going to go home, and they had done their times. It was somebody else's turn to join the army and fight if they were going to keep fighting. Washington knew if that happened, this whole war was over and it was for nothing. One thing that makes those miserable teams that you're on not so miserable and makes you like each other again is winning. All you got to do is win one time. And Washington knew that. He needed a win, and he needed a real win. What he'd been doing so far, small skirmishes, quick retreats, he avoided that large battle, and he was trying to prolong things as long as he could. But he needed a real victory. So he knows about those Hessians camped in Trenton across the Delaware. He figures on Christmas night, they're going to be celebrating Christmas, and they're Germans, so they're probably going to be drinking a lot of beer. So the next morning, they're not going to be at their best. He also thinks no one will expect him to move at night. No one will expect him to try to cross this icy river in the middle of the night, especially when it's snowing and sleeting. And so his goal is to catch them by surprise. And he does it. He crosses the Delaware in the middle of the night and marches to Trenton. And when he gets there, he catches them by surprise and does the impossible. He has a victory against these Hessians. He captured about 1,500 of them. First of all, it makes Washington a legendary hero. His men will follow him anywhere after this. The second thing it does is all those men who were thinking about going home on January 1st sign up to keep fighting. And the third thing it does is it gives Americans hope. And the only thing more powerful than fear is hope. And the Patriots now have it. That was a big deal. So what do you do after you get a victory like that? Most of the time, people would just celebrate their victory and move on. Wait till spring and fight again. Rest up after that horrible march. Well, Washington finds out there's a small group of British soldiers not very far away in Princeton, New Jersey. And so he goes less than 10 days after his victory at Trenton and attacks the British at Princeton, and he wins again. Why is this important? Right down here in this bottom paragraph. Other countries were watching. We had Benjamin Franklin over in France trying to convince the French to join on our side. We needed money and guns and ammunition and some ships, and it would really help if they would send some soldiers too. We needed help. European countries didn't want to join in because they weren't quite sure we could win. Well, this makes them pay attention. Not only did we defeat Hessians, we also defeated a real British army at Princeton. We had already won at Ticonderoga. We had already won at Lexington and Concord. We held our own at Bunker Hill. New York was terrible, but we've got momentum back after Trenton and Princeton. So then the second part of their plan here, this middle section of fighting, they're trying to divide the colonies, divide and conquer. And there's a plan devised by British General John Burgoyne. He's going to come south from Canada and attack the capital of New York at Albany, New York. To do this, he expects to get some help from General Barry St. Ledger over here in Fort Oswego. He's going to come east down the Mohawk River and join him at Albany. And General Clinton down in New York is going to come up the Hudson, and 3 armies are going to converge at Albany. At least that's Burgoyne's plan. It didn't go very well. First of all, you can see there is no 3rd army that comes up here. St. Ledger gets defeated at Oriskany, turns back to the fort, has to save his army by retreating. Clinton decides he's got a better plan. He's going to go take the capital city of Philadelphia. That was where the Patriot capital was. That's where Continental Congress met. He thought if he could take the Continental capital and he could capture Continental Congress, then the Americans would give up. Well, he was able to take the city, and again, Washington and his army just got absolutely destroyed at Brandywine Creek and Germantown outside of Philadelphia. The British take Philadelphia, and they do not capture Congress. So whatever gain he made by getting that city, it was outweighed by the fact that he never went to help Burgoyne. Burgoyne keeps coming south thinking he's going to have help, and he doesn't. American General Horatio Gates sees there's an opportunity here. So he goes and meets Burgoyne's army near Saratoga, and they have a set of skirmishes for about 2 or 2.5 weeks. At the end, Burgoyne surrenders his army. This is a huge victory for the Americans. People call it the turning point of the war. It's at this point where things really start to change for us. And the big reason things start to change is we're not going to be fighting Britain by ourselves anymore. Because of this victory, this major victory at Saratoga, the French signed a peace treaty with us. It's called the Franco-American Alliance. This American victory finally convinces France to join our side. They give us troops, weapons, ammunition, even a navy. And soldiers come over too. One of the first to come over is the Marquis de Lafayette. We will help him later on when the French rebel against their king. So what does Washington do after getting absolutely annihilated around Philadelphia and losing the capital? Well, he retreats into the Pennsylvania wilderness again to a place called Valley Forge to make his winter camp. The British are going to spend the party season in Philadelphia, nice and warm, lots of food, nice houses to sleep in. They're going to have a good time. Washington and his army, this is the kind of time they're going to have. It's not good. It was really snowy. Their shelters were really just like holes dug in the ground and covered with as much as they could cover them with, branches, mostly pine branches if they could find them. But these guys, some of them didn't have coats. Some of them didn't even have shoes. And when they marched around in the snow, they left bloody footprints all over Valley Forge. The men were starving. They had frostbite. They were spreading diseases. Probably the lowest morale of the war. This is one of the lowest points for confidence for these soldiers. But there's a couple things that change that. Number one, propaganda. Thomas Paine, who had written a piece of propaganda called Common Sense to convince people to declare independence, now writes something called The Crisis. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. So it's really easy to be a soldier when the sun is shining. and it's summertime. It's hard to be a soldier when you have to endure this and these conditions in the wintertime. Um, True patriots will fight no matter what, says Thomas Paine. And those words really unite people, even though there's a great loss here for Americans in life and morale. Really, when they come out of this terrible winter, they're much more unified and ready to fight. But the other thing that happens is that Franco-American alliance and that victory at Saratoga pulling in foreign help really starts to show. Foreign leaders start to show up, and one of those is Baron von Steuben, who had some. He was a Prussian military officer, had some experience fighting in the French and Indian War. His specialty was training soldiers, teaching them how to march, teaching them how to maneuver on a battlefield and take commands on a battlefield. And so you can imagine one thing that might keep you warm if you're in those horrible cold conditions is if you keep moving. So von Steuben makes sure these men are moving all the time, training all the time. The other thing that does is it keeps their mind off of how cold and hungry and miserable they are. It gives them something to do instead of just sit around and think about how terrible things are. So not only are they stronger mentally, they're actually stronger militarily because they know what they're doing when they come out of this winter at Valley Forge. It was bad. They were eating horses and all kinds of crazy stuff just to survive. We also had a crazy naval victory. So the Franco-American alliance, the French gave us a ship. We didn't have a navy. They gave us a merchant ship. So that didn't even have guns on it. We had to outfit it with guns. We called it the Bonhomme Richard, the Poor Richard, named after Benjamin Franklin and Poor Richard's Almanac, which he wrote. And the leader of our Navy, John Paul Jones, the captain of the Bonhomme Richard, decided he was going to go over to Britain and he was going to fight them in British waters near Flamborough Head, the Atlas Activity 17. Flamborough Head near England, right off the coast of England. We go over there and you can see the condition of his ship. The mast, the main mast is busted. These sails have holes in them like crazy. That ship is sinking. And the British officer asks John Paul Jones, are you ready to surrender now? Because, if he didn't surrender, he's going to sink to the bottom of the English Channel. And supposedly John Paul Jones yells back, surrender? I've not yet begun to fight. And he takes rope and a grappling hook and he ties these two ships together. So if the Bonhomme Richard sinks, so is the British ship, the Serapis, or Serapis, I've heard it called. I'm not sure of the correct pronunciation. But that British ship is going to sink too. What happens then when they're tied together is the Patriots jump off of the sinking Bonhomme Richard and they take the fight to the British on the deck of their ship, hand-to-hand combat, and the Americans force the British to surrender. That British ship becomes an American ship, and the Bonhomme Richard makes its trip to the bottom of the sea, to Davy Jones's locker. So, huge naval victory for the Patriots in 1779. Late in the game, the British make one last strategy switch. They're going to move to the southern colonies for the later battles. The strategy is they're going to make an outpost there at the bottom of the map. You can see it, Charleston, South Carolina. They're going to take Charleston, and then all reinforcements and supplies are going to come into Charleston, and they're going to move out across the Carolinas. The idea is you get some victories out here, and all of a sudden, they believe there were more loyalists in the South. There probably were. Those loyalists come and join the British Army, and you take that army of British soldiers and loyalists, and you just sweep north through the colonies, and you wipe out the rebellion. Well, everything starts out going really well for the British. They win at Charleston. They take Charleston Harbor, get a stronghold in the South. The loyalists rise up and support the British. They go out into the countryside, and they almost completely destroy the American army at the Battle of Camden. But things all hit a rocky road in this crazy little battle in the backcountry of the Carolinas, right on the border of North and South Carolina. It's called the Battle of Kings Mountain. Patriots and loyalists. We're not talking about red coats and blue coats here. We're talking about militias. We're talking about people who knew each other, neighbors, maybe even friends before the war, people they did business with, people they went to church with. And sometimes those fights can be the ugliest fights of all, because when you know somebody, you can't believe they would take the opposite side of you. So what happens at Kings Mountain is the Patriots win this battle, and the loyalists throw down their guns, throw up their hands, and they surrender. Well, the Patriot commander loses control for about 10 or 15 minutes after that victory, and the Patriots start shooting, bayoneting, running through those loyalists with a sword, and they just slaughtered these surrendered men, these unarmed men. And finally, the Patriot commander gets them under control, but not before a lot of really ugly carnage. Now, that also serves a really important purpose. It sends a message to those loyalists in the South. Don't come out and join the British, or this could be you. And so that success early for the British in the South starts to fade as the loyalists will leave. They take off. They don't want any part of it. If you think back to that map, you saw how far out the British were getting from Charleston. They're hundreds of miles away now. Their supply line is really long, and it opens up an opportunity for people like Francis Marion, guerrilla fighters. They are not really part of a militia. They're not really part of the formal army. These are guys who just want to help whenever they can, and they do the best they can. And the best they can is they just harass those supply lines. As wagon trains full of new soldiers and new supplies head out into South Carolina to catch up with the rest of the army, guys like Francis Marion, his nickname is the Swamp Fox, they attack those supplies, they steal that stuff, they get it to the Patriots, and they just generally make life for the British really, really miserable. The reason he's called the Swamp Fox, the British hated the swamps. They were afraid of the swamps. They were dark and scary. People got lost in them. There were a lot of bugs. There were poisonous snakes. There were alligators that would eat people. And the British would not chase these people into the swamps. So it was really easy because they knew the terrain. They knew the swamps. And they would go attack those supply lines, take the stuff, fade away into the swamps, and they knew they'd be safe because the British would never come and chase them. So that's what's happening a lot in the South. Then the Patriots get a real victory, a toe-to-toe victory of Patriots against British soldiers. The blue coats of the Patriots and the red coats of the British at the Battle of the Cowpens. And now Cornwallis, the commander of the British troops in the South, Cornwallis is in real danger, and he starts heading north. He's headed for Virginia and headed for the coast, hoping to get there and get some reinforcements or get taken away by the British Navy when he gets to the coast of Virginia. But the Patriots won't let him go. They just keep chasing. And he ends up trying to make a stand here at Guilford Courthouse, North Carolina. And technically in the battle, he does win. He takes the ground he wants. The Patriots have to retreat. But it is another one of those costly wins like Bunker Hill. He lost 1/4 of his people, 25% casualties. They're in deep trouble. They're in the middle of nowhere. Their army's now weakened by 25%. And they got to get to Virginia quickly. Here they are, way out here. You can see how far away they were from Charleston and why it was so dangerous out here when those supply lines coming up from Charleston couldn't get to them when Francis Marion kept attacking them. So they're going to go from Guilford Courthouse as fast as they can, headed northeast to the coast of Virginia. And they finally make it to Yorktown, the Battle of Yorktown. This is the final battle of the war. It was a siege. It lasted about 3 weeks. Washington heard about Cornwallis moving into Virginia. And so he and the French commander, Rochambeau, codename Rochambeau, he and Rochambeau, the French commander, decide they're going to go down there, but they trick the British first so that the British fleet doesn't leave New York. and go give Cornwallis a way to get out of Yorktown, they pretend to attack New York City. So the British stay there and they leave a few people there to make it look like they're still around New York, but really what they're doing is going south. They're headed for Yorktown. You can see why it's such a dangerous position. Here comes Washington and Rochambeau to surround Cornwallis at Yorktown. The only hope they have is that the British fleet can come down from New York, make it into the mouth of Chesapeake Bay, get up the river here where the British can load onto those ships and the British can take them away. Well, the French fleet arrived before the British, and there was a fight right here. Again, Atlas Activity 17. A fight at sea in 1781, right off the coast of Virginia, called the Battle of Virginia Capes. And the French fleet defeated the British. Now the French fleet can shoot cannons from their ships into Yorktown, and Yorktown is surrounded by soldiers on the ground as well. Cornwallis has no other options. He's surrounded by 14,000 French and American troops. He's only got 7,500. And Britain is really just tired of spending money on this war. Remember, this whole upset started when the British were taxing the colonists because they were in debt from the French and Indian War. And that Britain was not getting money from their tax policy. They were still in debt from the French and Indian War. And now for 7 years, they've been fighting the American Revolution, and they've gone even deeper in debt. At this point, the colonies aren't worth it anymore. They don't make enough money for Britain to continue to pour this kind of life of their soldiers and treasure tax money from their people into a fight that they're not going to win. And even if they do win, it's just going to be a few years down the road, and these unhappy patriots are going to rebel again. So the British surrender at Yorktown. It's the last major battle of the war. We consider this the end of fighting, even though there were a few more skirmishes and things after that, because the peace treaty isn't signed for 2 more years. This is a painting of the British evacuating the fort, and supposedly they played this song, "The World Turned Upside Down." That's why Lin-Manuel Miranda uses that phrase and made that song, "The World Turned," or that line, "The World Turned Upside Down." If you look at the lyrics, it's the world gone crazy. Everything is opposite. Buttercups, those are flowers. If buttercups buzzed after the bee, if boats were on land, churches on sea, if ponies rode men, and if grass ate the cows, and cats should be chased into holes by the mouse, if the mamas sold their babies to the gypsies for half a crown, if summer were spring and the other way round, then all the world would be upside down. If the little dirtbag nobodies from America can defeat the most powerful empire on earth, the world must surely be turned upside down. Finally, the war officially ends with the Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783. It was more than America could have ever asked for. We win the war, obviously. Those 13 colonies become our first 13 states. America becomes a country that's independent from England. And this was the big one that we weren't expecting. All that land that the British had gained from the French in the French and Indian War, we got most of it. The British kept Canada, thank goodness, because nobody wants Canada. We got all the stuff from the Great Lakes down to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Mississippi River, and we were a free and independent country recognized by everyone on earth. America, or as some people like to say, America. And that's all I got to say about that. We can talk about any of this in person if you want, but I'm going to wrap it up right there. And I will see you next time. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.